Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Jim Bachman. I'm with the Brewers Association of Maryland. I want to welcome all of you to another wonderful Fermented Friday. The weather's beautiful throughout most of Maryland today, so I hope you're enjoying it and taking all advantage that you can of the beautiful skies and the nice warm temperatures. We're going to be joined today by Mike with Sapwood Cellars. I'm very excited about this conversation. I really like doing these because I learn a lot about approaches to beer that I may not be familiar with. I learn a lot about new business concepts, and Mike and Scott over at Sapwood have a very cool background when it comes to their knowledge of beer, their approach to making great beers, and I'm excited to hear what Mike has to say and share with you guys about their history. But before we get started, just want to let everybody know that Maryland breweries are open for business. Please show your support to a Maryland brewery this weekend. See how you can support them by visiting marylandbeer.org or visiting your favorite local brewery's website or social media. Everybody's doing their best to keep you safe with social distancing, curbside pickup, delivery. Find out how you can get Maryland beer and enjoy some this weekend. And without any further ado, Mike, how you doing this afternoon?
Really well. Thanks for inviting us on.
Absolutely. It's great to see you. It's great to have you guys on finally. We've been doing this for several months now, getting breweries in, hearing all about their background, their stories, and I figured why not go to the guy that wrote the book on American sour beer and figure out if we can talk about some cool things and learn about what you guys do there.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's already been 2 years since we opened. It felt like forever when we were in that planning stage, and all of a sudden, once those doors opened, it just time flies.
Yeah, they say that time flies when you're having fun, and I know that you guys have been having a lot of fun at Sapwood.
Yeah, well, when you're having fun and just when you're busy. I was a government employee for a long time and got home at 5 or 5:30 every day and had a lot of time for writing and all sorts of other things. And now it's a lucky day that I'm out of here before I've been here for 11 hours or so.
That sounds about right. So you're definitely right in the step with the professional brewery. That's great. I like to hear it. So that was a great intro to your background. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did prior to this and what inspired you to get into craft beer and open a brewery with Scott?
Sure. I started homebrewing in college, like 2005 at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. I just needed some credits my last semester, and I took Beer Brewing Appreciation, which was a student-led class. I'd been into cooking. I'd started picking up good beer. A good friend of mine from childhood had driven me around the summer before when we both turned 21, looking for like the top 10 beers on Beer Advocate or wherever we were trying to find. And sort of homebrewing felt like the next step in that. And for about 10 years, it was just sort of an active hobby. I still try to maintain my blog, The Mad Fermentationist. I wrote for Brew Your Own Magazine. I wrote for Zymergy. I did a book, American Sour Beers, for Brewers Publications that came out 6 years ago now. And then I started doing consulting was sort of the next step. So I took a summer off from work to help get Modern Times off the ground out in San Diego, and I did some consulting for Bottle Logic and J. Wakefield and a bunch of other really cool breweries that just sort of let me write recipes that they would tweak or brew or whatever. And then I was kind of happy being a government employee. Good benefits, good pay, stability. And then I had one too many home brews at a club meeting, and I was talking to Scott, and I was like, "Hey, like if you ever want to open a brewery, like we should talk about it." It was like, actually, I've been putting a business plan together. It'd be really interesting to talk to you about it. And he had looked at a space in the Hyattsville area and had just sort of decided it wasn't like a one-person operation. He really wanted a second person to divide up tasks with and be able to, focus on certain areas. And so we started talking, and we found this awesome space in Columbia that was already partially built out. And went from there. It was sort of a whirlwind, but so far has been a great decision and really a change for both of us.
Yeah, your planning to opening phase, at least from my recollection, didn't seem like it was the longest thing in the world. It seemed like you guys had all your ducks in a row and you were able to get off the ground pretty quickly compared to some of the things that we see in other places throughout the state.
Yeah, it was certainly rough there for a little while. And we're again lucky that we had a space that already had a tasting room built out, and pad, even though it was a little undersized, and a couple things like that. But still, we had signed the lease in December, and then we opened the following almost October. So still 10 months. And we had some trouble with our liquor license, and there were a couple other things that kind of head us up a few nights early on. But luckily, that all ended up working out, and we were able to take advantage of the special event passes to have the tasting room running before the liquor license was finally approved a couple months after we opened.
So in terms of what your product lineup and portfolio is going to be, how did you guys arrive at what you're providing to consumers now? Did you have the idea that we were going to offer beers that fall into this kind of category and approach, or was it something that you really kind of sat back and waited for consumer input to hear?
It's a little of both. I mean, definitely our passion. Both of us love hazy, juicy IPAs, and both of us love barrel-aged sour beers. And so we knew that both of those would be a big part of the lineup, but we didn't really, come up with core beers or anything like that. And we still really don't have core beers. We have recipes that come back if we really like them, and they sell well and people enjoy them and ask for them to come back, they'll come back. But I think the most we've brewed any recipe is 5 or 6 times at this point over 2 years. So it's not something where you can expect the same beer to be on all the time. Almost always, though, we have a hoppy pale ale, an IPA, a double IPA, something funky or sour, something that's a little darker, something that's a little bit more yeast driven. And then those things just kind of rotate through. And for example, we weren't really planning on having stouts all the time. And that really has been something that there's been a great public response to, and that I've always enjoyed dark beers. I'm maybe not an imperial stout in the middle of summer kind of guy, but I know some people turns out want a stout no matter what the weather is.
I'm one of those guys. If we get a cool August evening, I'm the guy who's sitting back with a stout.
Yeah, no, and luckily, just both of us having been homebrewers for 10 or 12 years, we both have deep backlogs, and both being bloggers, we really did a good job of recording recipes, but then also our tasting notes and what we might want to change next time. And we're still going back to our blogs to see, hey, did we ever try this hop combination? What did we do for a brown ale in the past? Those sorts of things. So it's been really, I'd say if you're looking to open a brewery, really do a great job, trying as many fun and interesting and unique things as you can before you're a professional brewer. Because once you get to this scale, it's a little bit more of a risk when you want to try something new.
Yeah, when your feet are held to the fire, you need to sell that volume or be able to at least execute it the right way. It's a little more daunting than it is when you're at home and you can say, hey, I might be able to lose 2.5 gallons or 5 gallons of this.
Yeah, and we try to sort of keep that spirit alive. We've got a couple of smaller, 15-gallon half-barrel fermenters that will pull some wort off of a beer and try a new yeast blend, say for an IPA, or dry hopping with a new variety after primary fermentation's done, or infusing a stout with fun, interesting, unique ingredients. That's trying to keep that hey, if this works, it's great, and if it doesn't, it'll be something interesting for people to have a half pour of in the tasting room and go, that's interesting, but maybe not, wow, that's delicious. But sometimes we also find that beers we think are amazing and fantastic and perfect, no one really loves, and sometimes the ones that we go, that's interesting and unique, but I don't know if I love it, are the ones that people are giving us emails about 6 months later saying, hey, when are you bringing that back? That was my favorite.
It's one of those things where you cannot argue a matter of taste with anybody, right?
Yeah, and that's part of being, and what we've had to learn as being professional brewery owners, brewers, rather than home brewers. I mean, I'll say I'll never brew anything that I'm not proud of. I'll never brew anything that I don't think is a quality beer. But if a beer is selling out quick, you're going to brew more of it rather than the thing that sits on tap for 3 or 4 months and doesn't, that there just isn't a demand for a second pour after people have it once.
Well, and regardless of how you personally feel about the beer, you're not necessarily the one who's paying your bills, right? You need the consumer to be behind you, and you need the consumer to be willing to support you through their transaction. And if you can't give them a beer that they are desiring, then you may have a tough time doing business.
Exactly. But at the same breath, we try not to just chase every single new trend or every single thing, because we do want to have an identity, and we do want to have enough specialization that we can focus in on something. We do a lot of different hoppy beers, but the same sorts of lessons you learn on what the right mash pH is, what the right whirlpool temperature for the hopping is, what the right agitation schedule for the hops and dry hopping. You learn a lot, even if you're not doing exactly the same beer again. And I think there's always a risk that if you spread yourself too thin, you don't get that kind of specialization and that experience.
Sure. And I think the way that you're approaching things, kind of identifying almost like a flavor parameter or a beer style guide that you're trying to fill those spots rather than trying to fill a recipe spot every time, probably makes things a little more exciting for you and your creative ambition, more so than just chasing the recipe you've already brewed a ton.
Yeah, exactly. But we miss out on that, the dialing in that can happen when you are brewing the same beer once a week or once a month or whatever, that you really can fine tune things in a way. Exactly what you're looking for in a hop variety when you're doing selection, exactly what where you expect fermentation to be after 36 hours, those kinds of things. And we're still kind of dialing those things in.
And I'm going to break the fourth wall for a moment and talk to the audience directly. If you've tuned into the last few weeks of our talks, or even if you haven't, and this is your first time, Mike's talking about something that I hear from brewers all the time, which is this necessity when you're brewing a recipe to tweak until it's perfect. And from everybody I've found, there's not yet been one person who's hit perfect. Everybody still wants to make a small change here and there.
Yeah, and for us, it comes down to being able to control as many variables as possible. So we're doing, pulling samples from our yeast culture and doing cell counts and viability checks and measuring the dissolved oxygen when we're aerating and adjusting our temp controllers, checking them periodically to make sure that they're outputting the real temperature from a calibrated thermometer, and really just doing sensory on all of our ingredients. It's easy to think of Citra hops as a single thing, but Citra is an agricultural product, and different years and different harvests and different lots and different processing all makes a difference. And so even if you're brewing the same recipe, again, if your ingredients aren't from the same lot or the same whatever, you're not going to have exactly the same beer. And for us, not having poor beers that are out there in the market, there's a little bit more flexibility we can have. While this batch is a little more citrusy and this one's a little danker, but we'd like them to be as consistent as possible whenever possible.
Certainly. And I'm sure with all the varieties of beers that you're putting out, or with the different recipes that you're producing, you're able to showcase kind of how those slight changes in perception of an ingredient may be defined as the consumer comes in more and more.
Exactly. Am I allowed to drink beer yet, or is that still later?
No, please drink right now, man. You're just going to make me thirsty. I've got my water over here. Oh man, I just saw that basket. I'm in love now.
We've got hopefully the most just pretentious setup we possibly could with our own home woven baskets from a company called Maryland Day Basket Co. that's up in Elkton, and they've been in business for about 150 years. And doing weaving, and it used to be really utilitarian, crab baskets and that kind of thing. And now they do a lot more specialty stuff. Last time I was up there picking up baskets, they were talking about that they'd just been making baskets for an Amazon Prime show that was set in 1880 or something like that.
That's wild.
And we got these just ridiculous glasses made by a company in England for our club members.
Okay, so does the beer actually hit the bottom of that slanted edge, or is that a flat base?
Yeah, no, it goes. Our brewer Ken has a real love-hate relationship with our Google Smart Speaker. No, the glass does go down into there, so it does fill up. But it's got that weird, it's almost a martini glass with an extension on top.
I love that. That's awesome, man.
And this is, we're actually doing a release tomorrow. So we are a vegan brewery almost always. My partner Scott is vegan, but once a year he lets me do something different. So honey saison with honey from Maryland Honey Co. So bees in Maryland. We even waxed it with beeswax from the same hives.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's we just have about 70 barrels going now, and sort of all of them have different cultures and different microbes. And then it really, that's the fun art part of brewing, is just going back there. Yesterday we were tasting through a bunch of barrels that would filled late last year, and figuring out which one would go on to locally foraged staghorn sumac that I picked up a few weeks ago.
That's awesome. When I first came in there, I feel like I recall you were talking about your barrel allocation and how you were working with some local wineries to actually get a few barrels and use those. Has that local relationship been able to keep up well?
Yeah, it's sort of the trouble with wineries is it's very seasonal, and so they're only emptying barrels often sort of right around summer into the fall. We've gotten a good number of barrels from Linganore Cellars up in Frederick, right where Red Shedman is. We got some port-style wine barrels from them and some Chamberson barrels, a couple others. And then we've gotten some barrels from Sagamore Spirits and a few other places. But we'll also go through a broker if there's something particular we need or we need it at a particular time and there isn't anything local available.
Sure. Certain volume or a certain spirit, maybe. Like, you're not going to find a tequila barrel in Maryland from a tequila manufacturer. So
exactly. And it's like everything. We like to use local when we can, but it's not always a practical option. For fruit, we try to stay local. We've gotten a lot of stuff from Bogger's Orchard and Milburn and a few other places. Local fruit's just fantastic in the summer, and so whether it's cherries or peaches or nectarines, we try to do as much local stuff as we can.
You're in from the outside looking in, you're in a strange position right now, trying to keep your lineup something that a vegan partner would be happy to be drinking, considering the influx of non-vegan materials that have been going into craft beer in the last 5 years.
Yeah, so we don't do any lactose. I mean, that's certainly the biggest one. We'll do maltodextrin, which is malt based. If we need a little extra sweetness, say in a kettle sour with vanilla or something like that. And then, honey's the only other one that really I kind of miss out on just because it's a local product, a local ingredient that really there isn't a great substitute for. And sometimes we can be a little lacking in local ingredients, and honey is shelf stable and unique and interesting and whatever. So
sure.
As part of the deal on that one, we're donating $1 per bottle for the Honey Saison to the Howard County Beekeepers Association. So
that's
obviously, like a lot of the vegetables and fruits that everybody eats are pollinated by bees, and so trying to support that and local agriculture seems like a worthwhile investment for us.
So is that an organization or an association made of all commercial beekeepers, or is it hobbyist and commercial?
It's mostly hobbyist, I believe. It's just people who have a handful of hives. So we bought the honey from a local company, but then the 501 or 503, wherever they are, whatever charity they are, is mostly home beekeepers.
That's great. I was going to ask if the apiary was a professional commercial apiary or if it was somebody local that you were dealing with. So thanks for answering that question.
It's a commercial apiary, and they also sell beekeeping supplies. They're over in Gaithersburg.
So while you keep sipping on that, I'd like you to think about letting everybody know about how the membership at Sapwood Cellars works. You mentioned it when you were talking about that glass.
Yeah. What's going on with your membership, and how did people get involved with that? Sure. So we've got two different clubs. The Wood Club is sort of the more bottle centric, and it's membership for 2021 will probably be opening up in the next month or two, and it includes 2 bottles each of eight beer releases, discounts on additional bottles, and then every year we do something. So the first year was the basket. The second year was the glass, and we've got something cooking for next year. And so the idea for that one is like, we'll hold on to the bottles, you can order them, and then just come and pick them up whenever you want, pretty much. And so it's pretty good if you're just into sour beers, or if you're maybe a little bit further away from us and don't make it in that often. A lot of our bottles will sell out within a week or two usually, and so it's hard for us to keep kind of a stock in-house if you want to come and buy a bunch of different bottles. And then the other club, the Sap Club, is more like a mug club. It is discounts on pours in the tasting room, discounts on growler fills. Next year, we'll probably also include discounts on cans. We just started doing canning, mobile canning pretty regularly this year, and particularly with the current situation, Beer to Go is more enticing than it maybe once was. And so that one, last year included that we did a club holiday party. I don't know that the club holiday party is going to be happening this year, but we may push it back to next year. We may have a summer fest kind of party, something like that. But there's sort of some options there.
Some kind of make good, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And can people find all the information about your clubs on your website?
At the moment, there's probably just a placeholder saying they're coming soon, but
okay.
We're pretty active on Facebook and Instagram, and we have a hold on, venting a keg. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for on the website. They'll give you sort of more details, particularly when something comes available. But we're still kind of figuring out the details for next year's clubs.
I thought that when I heard about your wood club the first time that it was a very innovative approach, especially in kind of the mid-Atlantic. Most breweries that I'd heard of doing any kind of club or, pre-funding through a club, all was a mug club concept. You come in, you have your special little glass hanging on the wall, and you get to get served in that. But when you start talking about bringing people into the fold with unique releases, beers that take a lot of time and passion to produce, and then you get a first whack at it and guaranteed first whack at it, it's like you can't pass that up. And I think that's a really, really novel way to approach kind of how the consumer experience is changing in the beer industry. Yeah,
it was awesome. The people who come in, particularly that first year, we didn't put out our first bottle until September. So people had joined that club and they didn't get much for about 9 months. And luckily now we are kind of up and running, and the releases are coming a lot faster than they once were. So it's
I'm sure
a little less of an unknown than it once was.
I'm not going to rush you through that beer, but before we get to the next one,
I've got a backup glass if we want to move on.
Oh man! So I was going to ask, kind of, where did you get all of your knowledge that kind of propelled you forward as an author in beer? You said that you didn't really have a background outside of your hobby for brewing. What kind of motivated you and propelled you forward with this? And I understand Scott wrote a book too, so it's not like we're talking about people who are just guessing. You guys have a lot of knowledge. Where did this all come from?
The internet's amazing. I mean, it really. When I was researching my book, the publisher just was pulling her hair out because my citations were just like, this was an email conversation that I sent to a brewery that I got an audio response to. So it really is just like reaching out to breweries, reading. I mean, we've got a big bookshelf. Scott's a little more adept than I am at combing through peer-reviewed studies of brewing stuff. I did a little of that, but it's always tough to, with a non-scientist, as an economist, to have a non-scientific background to be able to pull out what really is actionable and maybe what's an interesting effect, but maybe not significant in terms of the flavor impact on the beer or something like that.
Sure. I imagine that kind of research, while it seems like it would be a whole lot of fun, I mean, I've been in conversations in a brewery setting where things get real deep real fast. And if you're not a microbiologist or somebody who has a background in, any kind of agriculture or something, you could be head underwater really, really quickly.
Yeah, but that's the nice thing about continuing to do small batch stuff is generally we won't take a scientific paper and brew a 10 or a 20 barrel batch based on it. We'll do a little 10 or a 15 gallon thing. And because that's really what matters. I mean, you can make any argument you want about, what this does on a molecular level, but if it doesn't make a beer that tastes delicious, it really doesn't matter.
That's absolutely correct. And that pursuit of scientific perfection may be at odds sometimes with the joy and pleasure that you get just from sitting there and drinking the beer.
Yeah, and it's sort of this is actually sort of a good illustration of that. This was less a scientific experiment, more just a flavor experiment. We'd pulled 15 gallons from a batch of double IPA and fermented it with our house English ale yeast, and then just a little tiny bit of Hefeweizen yeast. And so the idea was to maybe not make it so banana-y or so clovey that you notice it, but just to add this extra oomph to the fruitiness of the hops. So it's cashmere hops, which are a relatively new variety that's sort of lemongrassy, citrusy, but also has a little of that greener kind of thing. And then just this little tiny bit of Hefeweizen yeast that we stepped up on our own and pitched into the tank. It really just it intensifies the aroma in a way that hops alone with a clean fermentation can't do.
That's a very novel approach, especially with the ester characters that you would get from a traditional Hefe yeast, just to be able to push things forward just a little bit.
Yeah, and our hope is too, and luckily we're in the position where we're pretty small. I don't know if you can see behind me. We just had 3 new 20-barrel tanks last week, so hopefully we can keep up better. But the ester character should hang on longer. So where a normal IPA is really, for us, starting to fall off after 4 or 6 weeks, even as the hops kind of die down, you still have that fruity, estery thing behind it. It just gives the beer a little bit more legs. It just doesn't fall off a cliff in the same way a really clean IPA can. Hops, no matter how low your dissolved oxygen is, are going to auto-oxidize, they're going to go downhill. And so this is a way for us to have a beer that is extra intense when it's fresh, and then also still pretty good and still has some fun flavors, maybe after 2 months, 10 weeks, something like that.
I think that's great that you guys have approached that, especially now as your model is beginning to pivot a little bit, right? You weren't expecting to be a canning brewery all the time. Now there's a lot more focus in that, like you said. So you're finding a way to give your beer longevity that's going to matter when it gets to the guest's house and is sitting in their refrigerator. That's really cool.
And for us too, it's a way to add variety. Some of my favorite, right? I've been a huge Trillium fan up in Massachusetts for a long time, and they do, I think, to me, the best hoppy beers in the entire world. But they have a very consistent profile, and that's great if you like that profile. But for us, we're still at that stage where we don't know what our profile, what exactly we want our profile to be, and it's fun to say, hey, here are 2 beers. This one's dry and clean and dank, and this one's sweeter and fruitier and brighter. And let those things sort of develop into separate lines or into separate identities that someone might say, wow, I really love this beer, but I'm not as fond of that beer. And that's kind of the goal, is that we really just want to have a great variety of beers. And even though they're all hazy IPAs, they don't all taste exactly the same.
And there is a lot of risk of that, especially if you're using a similar yeast strain with all of these beers. I mean, hops will get you so far, but once you finish that beer and you start to taste how it's completing its exploration down the palate, you're kind of stuck with the same finish or the same finished experience that you would have. I was just going to say, I like the idea that if I'm sitting down having an IPA from you and another local brewery, there's something about your IPA because of that yeast that may stand out to me just a little bit more and make me say, hey, what did they do there that's so unique? So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fun for us. And honestly, like, that's what, I mean, the magic of beer, whether it's sour beer or fresh beer, is fermentation. And that's, having a slightly different fermentation is something that can really make your beer unique, because there are only so many varieties of hops and there's only so many different timing. But once you start doing that, that matrices of, a dozen different yeast strains and a dozen different hop strains, and, crossing them and combining them, that's where sort of the huge range of beer can come from.
So as you wave that beautiful looking beer around in the camera, I'm going to ask about availability. You said that it's canned. Where can people get it? Is it only at Sapwood? Are you guys distributing cans?
Every once in a while we send a couple of cases out, but for the last couple of months we haven't sent a single can or a single keg out the door. But again, up until a week ago, we had essentially a 20-barrel tank and 2 10-barrel tanks for our clean beers, for our non-sour beers. And we just had 3 20-barrel tanks. So we went from like 40 barrels of fermenter space to 100 barrels.
That's a nice jump.
And so it's kind of up in the air at this point, as we fill those, as we get bigger yields, whether, I assume a little more of it will go out the door. But at the moment, obviously, the tasting room has not been nearly as busy as it was, a year ago. And we're hopeful that as the tasting room comes back online, that'll mean that we'll have, because at the moment we don't have a lot of draft beer available in-house. We always have a few beers, but a lot of it goes into cans, and then the cans are gone. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to have plenty of draft beer for the tasting room as things slowly return to normal, and cans to go. And hey, maybe our cans won't sell out in the weekend we release them, and they'll be available for a week or two for people to take with them if they stop by for a pour.
Well, that's a great plan. I like to hear that. I also like that you're looking forward to things on the positive side.
Yeah. No,
I mean, you guys have a business that's so tasting room centric that this whole thing, I mean, a majority of the craft beer industry right now is a model that is tasting room friendly. Most of the business is being done over the bar there in that room, and people are experiencing the brewery. So for you guys to have to adapt so well, I think is great. But I also think it's good that you have a positive outlook for what's going to happen in the next couple of months.
Yeah, and in some ways it pushed us because we were going to be moving towards canning. These tanks were delayed a couple of times. But being forced to go into canning and having that response from the public really gave us a little more confidence than if we had to make that jump with just the tasting room being the main source of sales. Now we've kind of gotten a taste for the to-go sales, and hopefully we can kind of roll those together and figure out what our timing is and the ratio of beer in cans to beer in kegs, and figure out how much we want to send out to distribution, that kind of thing.
So are you seeing your regulars coming back and buying beer to go often, or are you seeing a whole new breed of consumer, like people that you may not have seen in the tasting room before who are out just exploring and trying to, maybe get out of the cabin fever a little bit, but also get a chance to explore what's going on in the beer scene?
It's definitely a combination. We were lucky enough to have opened up in 2018 and have enough enthusiastic customers that they, particularly early on, really the number of growlers, and we started filling 16-ounce growlers by hand, 16-ounce cans by hand. They really helped us out early on before we could really get canning going and things like that. And now when we put a new beer out, we definitely see a new swath of people. And that's the problem with having a tasting room that's in an office park in a non-public transit, area, is that, you really can't come here and drink that much beer and leave safely. But it makes a lot more sense to make a little bit more of a drive, to make a trip out of it if you can go home with a couple of 4-packs and a bottle and get to try a couple of half pours while you're here. And I obviously, people are stocking up more than they once were and trying to make fewer trips out. And so, it's kind of hit or miss. And we're really fond of everyone who keeps giving us business.
Yeah, that's the sentiment that we seem to be hearing from around the state. Everybody is very, very glad and thankful for the amount of enthusiasm that the beer consumer still has, even despite how crazy the world is around us right now.
Yeah, as breweries, we're lucky compared to restaurants and some other things where packaged beer at home has always been a pretty big part of the total beer market. Compared to restaurants that are trying to figure out to go and delivery and all those sorts of things. With a perishable product, it really. I'm glad I'm a brewery and not a restaurant.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, Exaggerated Truth, is that still currently available for people to order through you?
No, so we have a few cases left for in-house consumption, but that sold out quickly. That was only a 10-barrel batch, and it was mostly gone the first weekend. The other one that we did at the same time was a 20-barrel batch. Cheater X2 is our second anniversary beer. So it's a double IPA with Australian Galaxy and Nelson Sauvin from New Zealand. And we went in on a pallet of New Zealand hops with our buddy Matt from Astrolab. So he was nice enough to sort of put the whole thing together. And so this was 2020 Nelson from that lot.
Nice blend of Southern Hemisphere hops there, man.
Yeah, it's we love Galaxy, but on its own it can be a little one note, and so that fruitiness sort of balancing out with the Nelson sort of danker, winier thing is something we really enjoy. We've done Cheater X was our first anniversary beer. It's like a 7.2 or a 7.3% IPA, and so we did Cheater X2 this year at 8.2, and it's easy enough to do Cheater X3 next year. Eventually, we're going to run out of alcohol, being able to go up. But
hey, you still got turbo yeast and all that kind of stuff. You can get there.
Yeah, exactly. Just feed it a whole bunch of sugar once it's 11 or 12% ABV.
Yeah, jack it up to 18 and call it a day.
So we'll see if we make it to like Cheater X4, maybe the end of the line. Both Scott and I are kind of wimpy when it comes to the really strong beers. Like even our biggest beers are like 10%, 11% maybe. I've just never been a huge fan of once they get to 13, 14%. It's just it's hard to drink.
I haven't experienced my worst beer experience happens to be that I was one of the folks that decided that Tactical Nuclear Penguin was a beer that I really had to get my hands on. And
I thought they just released the new highest alcohol beer in the world, collab between Brewdog and whoever the other brewery is that was doing the.
So they finally decided to stop going at each other and combine their effort, huh?
Yeah, so they combined it was, I think it was like 57.8, and so the name is like, it's like 5, and then the 6 is gone, 7, 8. I mean, it's, what is that, 120 proof or something like that?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's nuts.
But we're not even going close to that. But we Scott and I both enjoy drinking beer, and really like one of our big passions is like moderate alcohol beer. Right now on tap we have a 3.2% Berliner Weiss, no boil, a German strain Brettanomyces, mixed ferment. We have a Gruit that was with homegrown yarrow that's 4% alcohol. We love doing pale ales. They're 4.5%, 5%, but dry hop like they were IPAs or double IPAs. Because all things being equal, I would rather drink 2 beers. I enjoy a double IPA, but if you gave me the choice between 1 9% beer or 2 4.5% beers that tasted almost as good, I'd rather drink more beer.
How do you see pull through working with those lower alcohol beers? Do you see that they tend to sit around a little bit longer in the tasting room, or do you have a consumer base that's receptive to it?
Now, we certainly see, we were actually surprised. So Rings of Light is sort of our closest to a core beer we have. It's a Citra Pale Ale, 4.8%. We did a canning run in it, sold just as quickly as an IPA or a double IPA. On draft, they tend to be a little bit slower. It's just tricky because a lot of the costs associated with a beer is the hops, the time in the tank. A few more bags of malt really is pretty negligible when you're doing beer on draft in house. And I think a lot of people sadly do that math where they say it's $6 for a pint of 4% beer, it's $7 for a pint of 6% beer, it's $8 for a pint of 8% beer. The most alcohol for my buck is the stronger beer.
Right.
And as a result, I suspect that doesn't help those beers sell. But in cans where you're getting a 4-pack and you can enjoy them at home and whatever, they seem to, people seem to be excited about them. But that'll be kind of the balance for us with these new tanks is figuring out, do we do a pale ale every month or do we do it every other month? Do we do a double IPA every 3 weeks or every 5 weeks? And it's just going to take us some time to kind of figure out, and particularly with the changing landscape, what makes the most sense.
Your comments about kind of the bang for the buck idea really do hold true. In my experience, I worked at a brewery that we put out a phenomenal table beer and a really nice session pale ale. And despite the fact that those beers had incredible amounts of flavor, really, really wonderful body, great palate experience, people would always kind of look at them and hesitate when you had other beers in the lineup that were up to 9%, 10% maybe, because of that bang for my buck concept. And there's a lot of false equivalency or false expectation that a beer that's light in alcohol is also going to be light in flavor overall. And I don't think that necessarily is the truth.
No, I mean, it shouldn't be, but I mean, sadly, alcohol is also a great solvent of flavors, a great carrier of flavors. It's hard to make if we could make a pale ale that tasted like a double IPA, we would. I would hope that our 4.5% pale ale drinks like a 5.5 or 6% pale ale, and our 6.5% IPA drinks like a double IPA or double IPA. That it has more oomph and more flavor and more. But alcohol is a flavor, and it's the same thing with non-alcoholic beers. I've had a couple from Athletic Brewing that are really well made and really well done, but there's no way to make a non-alcoholic beer that tastes like a real full beer.
Right.
You can get close, but alcohol is a flavor.
There's always that thing that might be escaping the experience if it's not what you expect.
Yeah. But no, I'd rather be a responsible brewer, and to us that means making beers that no matter the alcohol are intense and flavorful and all those things. I've never found like it hides its alcohol well to be a compliment. I'd rather if you drink a 12% beer, I'd rather it was thick and viscous, and I don't want it to be boozy or hot or necessarily, but like I'd rather not drink a 12% beer and think it tastes like an 8% beer.
Right.
I'd rather an 8% stout had so much roast intensity and viscosity and variety of flavors that you thought it might be a 10 or 11% beer. To me, that's the bigger compliment than, wow, that's an 18% alcohol imperial stout that I could drink like it was 12%.
Yeah. That's so sneaky. That's not. Yeah, I've heard that several times at events where somebody's like, "Oh, try this. It'll sneak up on you," and it's like, I don't necessarily want that. I'd like to know it.
Yeah, and speaking of which, hopefully I'm off camera dumping these two beers together so I can open up our ridiculous stout.
Yeah, this is intriguing. I can't wait to hear the story about this guy.
Yeah, so we love having big stouts around just because fun adjuncts and flavors just go so well with the big roasty beer. So as you can probably see him walking in the background, Spencer, our tasting room manager, about maybe a year and a half ago, took one of our stouts and added chai tea. So he just went to the local store, got the brand of chai tea he liked, steeped it in the finished beer and threw in some vanilla beans, and it worked really nicely. But this time, when I went to India years ago for a friend's wedding, and I had coffee with the same masala, the spices, the cardamom, the cinnamon, the clove, the vanilla, with coffee instead of tea as the base. And so this one was Time Stream, which is our like super roasty, intense, 10.3%. It finishes with more sugar than our pale ale starts with, just to give you sort of the ballpark for what we're dealing with. And so I added freshly roasted coffee from a place called Happy Mug, which is just outside of Pittsburgh, that does really great stuff. And they obviously, please support Maryland coffee roasters, but this place for $3 will ship you coffee that they've roasted within a day or two. Natural process, like light roast, really fun stuff for really reasonable prices. And then we buy a lot of spices from Spice House and Penzies and places that really know what they're doing with spices. And so I cracked some green cardamom pods. There's really great Saigon cinnamon that to me has like a real like cinnamon roll, kind of like that intense, almost apple cinnamon kind of flavor. A couple of cloves, and then some grade B Madagascar vanilla beans along with the coffee. Infused them for over the weekend, and then we crowlered it off on yesterday. And it's just amazing how far, I think it was like 15 cardamom pods and 15 gallons of beer and a couple ounces of cinnamon. It just, to me, it's that warming baked good kind of thing. We use a lot of vanilla. We buy a lot of vanilla because it is so complementary. Whether it's a dark beer, adding that perceived sweetness and rounding out those sort of more bitter roasted flavors, or with citrus zest. We do a lot of beers that we call sorbet that have like orange or grapefruit or lemon or lime zest along with vanilla beans. We've honestly even had great luck just adding like so many of these juicy IPAs have citrus and melon and tropical flavors, but just vanilla along with those. We do a beer called Vanilla Fort, which is Pello Fort, which actually you can probably hear bubbling behind me, a double IPA with Citra and Azaka, and then just vanilla, no fruit. And it really comes across as this creamsicle, orange Julius, richness, roundness. And again, it's a way for us to cheat, and rather than using lactose, we're using vanilla. Obviously, vanilla is $500 a pound. Lactose is, $2 a pound or whatever. So, there's sacrifices we have to make as a vegan brewery, but that's something that, thank you for supporting our beer and buying our beer and letting us, continue to do these sort of ridiculous things.
Well, and you're able to produce a flavor that satisfies what the consumer is looking for while complementing the beers that you're producing well, and you're able to do them in a way that stands up to the ideas and the ideology that is important to you as a business owner, and I think that's great.
Yeah, and we're trying to have fun. We've got a collab with Aslan Brewing from Alexandria going. They'll get vanilla next week along with peaches and apricots, sort of a sour with those sort of sweeter flavors. And we're always trying to do something new. And we're a bunch of home brewers, other than Ken, the guy who we hired, who actually knows what he's doing, and keeps us honest and make sure we're actually doing things in a way that we can grow and in a way that people get a consistent product. Because if it was up to Scott and I, we would probably have 215-gallon fermenters that all had different things going, and you wouldn't even be able to get 2 pours of the same beer, let alone the same beer month to month.
Well, it's very nice to have somebody who's interested in protecting your vitality as a business.
Yeah, he's the only one getting a paycheck, so it's fine.
There you go. He's keeping himself honest. I wanted to ask you, there's been this monumental movement towards fruited kettle soured beers in the marketplace, and you've mentioned a couple of times about barrel aged sours and how you guys are approaching it. Do you have a place in your portfolio that makes room for both styles and approaches, or are you truly immersed in the world of like the unclean fermentation of sour beer?
Yeah, so for our first year and a half, I think we only did 1 kettle sour. And that was actually a dry hopped, sort of like a sour IPA. And so with that one, we kettle soured, let the lactobacillus do its thing. And then when we heated up to pasteurize, we added a whirlpool hop addition of fruity New Zealand hops. And honestly, for all we did a lot of fresh draft kettle sour feeling sour beers, but all of them were lactobacillus souring in primary fermentation. Some of them had Brett, some of them were 100% Brettanomyces. With the shift to canning, no one around here will can real sour beer unless it's pasteurized or whatever. And so we have moved to kettle souring for those beers. And it allows us to do beers that are more of a sweet sour balance. That was something that we really couldn't do on draft. But we're still trying to do it as we grow up the lactobacillus ourselves. We are still trying to do more interesting fermentations when it's possible. But yeah, I mean, I've got nothing against those beers. Honestly, when you're adding that much fruit, and a lot of those beers were adding 2 to 3 pounds per gallon of fruit, the subtlety of the microbes is probably not something that comes through in the finished product anyway. We tend to be a little less. So, for example, I love using local fruit in the barrel-aged sours. Right there, we have a beer that was in oak for 18 months, and that went on to 200 pounds of local dark sweet cherries and 300 pounds of local sour cherries. For the kettle sour stuff, we're more likely to go with a juice or a puree or an aseptic, so clean fruit product that is consistent and that we can deal with in our big cylindrical tanks, and be still just as heavy-handed with it, just as intense, but it's not quite the showcase that the bottled, barrel-aged, mixed ferment, long exposure to the fruit and the skins and the pits, and you get a lot more layers to the fruit flavor, I think. But at the same time, 1 bottle is going to set you back as much as a 4-pack of our Plush Pop, which was freeze-dried raspberries, fresh lime zest, and vanilla beans. And if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for that bright, zesty fruit hammer, then the kettle sour stuff in the cans is what you want to look at. If you want something that is a little bit more special, something you want to sit down with, something you want to split with somebody and think about, and pour it a little bit cold and let it warm up and pull out the different flavors. It's just a different product. It's a different drinking experience.
Big supporter of Maryland beer, Greg Parnas, has a question for us. With the additional tank space that you guys have added, do you feel that you'll be producing some more lagers in the future?
Yeah, it's not bubbling as fast as the double IPA, but we have a second batch we did last year, a Tamabe Pivo, a Czech dark lager. So think of it as German Pilsner is to Czech Pilsner, Schwarz beer is to Tamabe Pivo. And then hopefully, if we can get a good harvest off that tank, next week we're doing a hoppy lager with our friends at Astrolab. So we're doing a Rawaka Nelson IPA lager. And then at Astrolab, we're going to be brewing a more IPA-ish version of a similar recipe. So folks hopefully will be able to try both, one with a lager yeast, one with an ale yeast, one that's maybe a little bit more of a Pilsnery malt bill, one that's a little bit more of a hazy IPA. Yeah, so that's there certainly will be more lagers coming. I don't know how often they'll be coming or anything like that. It certainly won't be something we have all the time, but we do, luckily those new tanks buy us a little bit of time. We won't have to be emptying a tank one day, cleaning it the next day, filling it the next day. We'll be able to keep things hanging around. We did an Oktoberfest for the first time this year, and it people got really excited about it. Last I checked, it was the third highest rated Oktoberfest or fest beer in the world, according to Untappd, which is ridiculous and silly and stupid. But thank you for the support on Untappd. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, there seems to be a real love-hate relationship with how those ratings work, huh?
I've talked to people at Untappd. I've written about Untappd. I won't say that we're intentionally gaming an Untappd, but it is Untappd favors you don't have your beer out there in the world too far. Right. Most of our ratings come from people who like us, who come to the brewery out of their way and drink our beer. Of course, they're going to give it better ratings than beer that was shipped across the country and has been sitting on the supermarket shelf for 3 months, and then somebody buys it on discount because it's old. Yeah, it says something, but it does not say who's the best beer or what's the best. We're not making better Oktoberfest than 200 other breweries in Germany and America, but ours was only available here, and that really, the people who bought a 4-pack of it, like us, and hopefully aren't going to give us a terrible rating, even if it's not their favorite beer ever.
There is a whole lot to that psychology of products that carry that exclusivity or the concept of having to go out of your way to get it. So people, I think you hit the nail on the head. If they have to come to you, they've already had this experience of the drive there and coming in and seeing your beautiful tasting room and go, wow, that's a really cool place. That all helps to tick that score up. If I'm going to Bob's Carryout right around the corner and I just grab the can off the shelf, that's a little bit less of an impressive feeling.
Well, and it's a personal connection thing too, that, that hope a lot of the people in the tasting room had met us, saw us, see the tanks. It feels a little different than giving a bad review to a faceless mega brewery that, you don't know the guy who brewed the beer, or the woman who owns it, or the delivery driver or the bartender who works there, and it's going to be a little less of a personal experience.
Absolutely. My favorites are always, I hate this style, I'm going to give it a 1. It's like, well, thank you for checking in. We appreciate that.
The best one I've seen personally was the best sour beer I've ever tasted, 1.5. I messaged the person. I was like, just making sure that was right. They're like, yeah, I don't like sour beers. This is the best one I've had. It's still not good.
Yeah, well, again, and I guess we can wrap up with where we started. You can't argue matters of taste.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about having a brewery, is that you don't have to make a beer for everybody. There are so many fantastic breweries in Maryland and around the whole area that we don't feel like we have to make a beer for everyone. And I think that's even something like hazy IPA. We can all make hazy IPAs, but they're not necessarily going to have the same balance of bitterness or sweetness or hop intensity or yeast character. that we can all make hazy IPAs, and some people are going to like what Black Flag or Hysteria or Reckless are doing in Colombia, and some people are going to like Sapwood beers, and that's perfect and that's wonderful. And it's like restaurants. A restaurant, you don't have to make every single kind of food. You don't have to make food for everyone. Have a variety. Have people enjoy what they enjoy.
And if you want to make food for everyone, just call the place Fusion and you're set. Your comment there about the approaches to style makes me think immediately of the Dream Team collaboration that True Respite, Hysteria, and Oliver did in the weeks following our sofa sipping thing. They did a great job of exactly what you just expressed, taking this base style of a hazy, juicy IPA, whatever it is, and showing how each brewery would do it differently.
Yeah.
And, even with the same base recipe, they all tweaked it their way. Which is really cool. And I think that that's a great example of exactly what you're talking about. So thank you for sharing that idea. So before we wrap up, we've got a couple of minutes left. Can you let the viewers know who are watching now and who may be watching over the next couple of days, what kinds of things they can expect at Sapwood in the next couple of weeks, and how they can support your brewery and your team there?
Sure. We've got a canning run coming up on 3 weeks from now, approximately. So we'll have a can release on the 24th with Pillow Fort, which is a Citra Azaka double IPA that we've done a few times. And then I think it's going to be called Droop Scoop, a collab with Aslan Brewing that we did with peaches, apricots, and vanilla. We've also got a barrel-aged, mixed ferment, long-term version of that beer that will probably be out next year. And then we have a bottle release on the Saturday the 10th, Sunlight of Bygone Days, which is a triple that we did with caramelized apple cider and then aged in Chardonnay barrels for almost 2 years with Brettanomyces. So it's not sour, but it's got like a funky, earthy kind of fun thing going on. And then our tasting room is sort of open, pretty normal hours, 2 to 8 p.m. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, noon to 8 p.m. on Saturdays, noon to 5 p.m. on Sundays. We have outdoor seating on the weekends. Got plastic cups. We've got cans. If you want to open your own can and pour it in your own cup, you're welcome to do it. We've got a couple beers on draft too. We'll probably be doing club membership stuff probably November if you're interested in getting in on that. And yeah, like we've got a YouTube channel where we do stupid things. Scott and I, the most recent one, we went to a dollar store and we each got $10 to make a variant on our Berliner Weiss. We also have some more serious content on there, and mailing lists, and follow us on social media. And I'm sure there's things I'm forgetting, but
I think that that's a pretty good list. I like that you described Brett character as earthy. I've never been fond of the barnyard horse blanket characteristics that people like to attribute to that yeast.
We've got a beer in bottles waiting on labels called Stallion Cover. Because when my book was coming out, there was somebody had like run it through Google Translate to another language and back again. And so it came out, Stallion Cover was horse blanket. And it also talked to, instead of sour beers, it kept saying acrid lagers. So you really knew someone was really putting some thought into it.
Nice. Do you guys have a cask program?
We have done one cask in our entire existence. The good folks from Society of Beer for the Society for the Preservation of Beer from the Wood did a bus trip, and they came here, and we put a young lambic-y style mixed ferment, aged hop, wheat based, whatever. On tap, because that's a classic Belgian Brussels kind of thing. But we do not have an engine and do not do casks regularly. I'd love to eventually. At the moment, the tasting room probably isn't busy enough to justify it. But
yeah, selling through casks is the difficult part. Even if you were to tap a pin or something, you want to get out of there in 72 hours or so before you start to really lose all of the benefit of that style of beer. So
yeah,
I just thought I would ask.
Yeah, go to Silver Branch. Christian does fantastic stuff with casks, and that's one of those, or Oliver's or wherever. I mean, it's just people who can specialize in it. I'll let them specialize in it.
Yeah, Well, you have the you seem to have the appreciation and the approach that would make for a great cask program if cask was something that was more consumable by a majority of beer drinkers.
Yeah, we've got like an English special bitter on right now with all Golden Promise and Styrian Goldings. That's the kind of beer that would be really awesome to have on cask. But,
yeah, absolutely. But again, need to get rid of it quickly, and right now is not the time for that.
yeah, we'll just have to find some little 1 gallon casks or something like that.
There you go. Well, I really appreciate your time today. It's great catching up with you. I hope I get to see you guys in person soon. I'm looking forward to our opportunities to sit down and enjoy beer together. Thank you for the beauty shots of the brewery there.
Thanks for having me on.
I look forward to the next time, and I hope to catch up soon. So, Michael, thank you. Everybody who's viewing this afternoon, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking an hour out of your afternoon to join us. And please tune in next week. We're going to be joined by Smoketown Cellars Smoketown Creekside in Frederick, Maryland. We're looking forward to that chat. And visit us at marylandbeer.org for any updates. Check out Sapwood Cellars' website and visit them on social media. And have a safe weekend, everybody.
Hope you enjoyed the tour.
Great tour. This is a nice ending.